A pleasure to meet all at last. And here we are. This is our last outing ever. Well, for this season of films I should have talked about years ago. So, as sad as it might sound, the truth is that there's just been a lot of new projects I've been having to work on, and so I've unfortunately had to make an episode cut down, going from my original plan of 97 episodes all the way back to 79. And because this is the 79th episode here, we're just going to go on ahead and spend our time here talking a bit about Sonic the Hedgehog 3. The last issue in the Sonic film franchise, or basically the Sonic movieverse, SMV if you will. Either way you look at it though, it is still probably one of the best films of all time. If not for this whole decade, if not for the year of 2024, and certainly not in the last few years that we've had such big blockbusters. Because to tell you the truth, we've had some incredible masterpieces. In this decade alone, the slobbering 20s, January 1st, 2020 to today, well, basically February 2026, if we want to get more technical about it. The fact is that 6 years have elapsed since that very point, and the thing is that by now, we've had a lot of exposure to modern filmmaking. And with people in their somewhat conflicting opinions about whether today's films are better than the originals, or classics if you will, it's probably a bit of a thing that's up for debate. But you know what? At least debates is one thing to kill time, in a good way. In any case though, Sonic 3, let's just get on into it. The whole film basically starts us off with a similar sort of thing as we did with the last film. There are some good, peaceful times that come around, but there eventually comes points in which that supposedly the peacetime happens to be cut off. An attack towards GUN forces, as well as towards the Sonic crew, basically ensues, implying that there could be another danger from Dr. Robotnik, or Eggman as he's been regarded by this point. Well, it turns out that these attacks were more of a direct attempt to steal some important item from GUN entirely. And unfortunately, the Colonel, in this instance, whom had been with GUN for a long time, and apparently has held some sort of secret with him for a long time, was unfortunately shot down, basically killed. The thing is, though, in this instance, you have the commander, played by Tom Butler, and he unfortunately doesn't make it. So what goes on here is that, well, we first off have Director Rockwell of GUN come in and declare Sonic a public enemy, blaming him for the death of the commander himself. And so, while a manhunt or hedgehog hunt is underway, investigations turn out that Dr. Robotnik himself had apparently been laying back with Agent Stone and some sort of massive beetle. Yeah, a beetle that happens to be lying in the water. Well, the thing is that this is the Dr. Eggman that we've had for some time, and he's been letting go, it seems. I mean, he lost 2 fights against Sonic, so he saw little reason to have to go after him again. And considering the fact that he still had Director Stone, well, Agent Stone and him still basically had work to do here. So, even though Sonic and Eggman were basically big enemies of each other, they eventually agreed to figure out the connections between a certain thing known as a key, as well as a second key. Because it turns out that the reason why the commander ended up killed in that battle was because he held a key to something. A key to a powerful weapon. And what were those robots that were attacking him? Well, it's eventually discovered in some sort of temple in which that Knuckles busts down the door. It's apparently an old facility. A facility in which that, as we do see in a bit of a prologue, there apparently is something that happened decades ago. A scientist known as Gerald Robotnik, basically the grandfather of Ivo Robotnik, or Eggman as he's been known as, he apparently created some sort of project of some sorts. Shadow was the name of the project itself. And while this was 50 years in the past, it sure did leave a supposed effect. The purpose of Project Shadow, according to the lore, and especially the plot of this film, is that it was meant to be a means to cure his granddaughter Maria of some sort of terminal illness. This illness, while not exactly disclosed, is basically kept secret as a means to thankfully avoid much crying around. Because who wants to see a child suffer? Probably nobody, right? Anyways, it turns out that GUN had to shut down the project early, and the commander was there with him all along. And so the commander unfortunately ended up shooting down Maria before the supposed Project Shadow, which turns out to be a black hedgehog. Much like Sonic in appearance, but with black quills instead of blue ones. And he also is voiced by Keanu Reeves. Yeah, no joke. This was a year after his last John Wick film, and speaking of which, we're supposed to have a John Wick game coming soon. But the thing is, there of course was also the spin-off Ballerina, which came out around the same time. I don't know if it's coincidental, but the thing is, Project Shadow was flung out into space, crash landing on Earth, and eventually refound after about 50 years or so. He was kept in a chamber for some time, preserved, until the very moment in which he busts out. And in that temple in which that it would hold a clue as to the whereabouts of the second key, well, even though one key was obtained, the second one managed to slip away from Team Sonic's grasp. Because Gerald Robotnik comes back in the flesh, despite being well over 100 years old. He still is able to move around like it's no problem at all. Probably because he is also played by Jim Carrey. Yeah, Jim Carrey plays Ivo on one end, Gerald on the other end. Mix them together. You got one hell of a duo here. Probably the best that we've seen from Jim Carrey so far. I mean, it was one thing where he did Robotnik himself, but to have his grandfather be played by Jim Carrey as well? I mean, was that the whole reason he wanted to, quote-unquote, step out of retirement? I mean, that was an old rumor that's been around for years now, but the idea of him going into retirement after playing Robotnik seems a little out of line with him, don't you think? I mean, Jim Carrey's just one of those guys who doesn't really age all that well. Nor even that much, so to speak. And even if he did, man, I still think he'd have a lot in him. Well, in any case, though, the search once again goes on because the grasp of the second key is far out of the reach of Team Sonic. And so what they end up trying to do is make a move to GUN headquarters, which is now located in the UK. Yeah, and it's heavily guarded by a combination of force fields and a lot of armed guards. And Director Rockwell, because of what happened to the commander earlier, she's practically on high alert, hoping that the Robotniks or Team Sonic end up showing up because she's basically the woman with the plan. Well, Team Sonic and the Robotniks have their own plan as well. In the case of the Robotniks, they blend in with the walls with those unique portraits of various crew members of GUN, which is pretty convenient, so to speak. Kind of funny. Imagine Robotnik's face in the suit of a supposed GUN member. I mean, would that even pass for anything? Well, in any case, though, it's just a film. We should really just relax. But the Robotniks reveal themselves and are both wearing skin-tight suits with red and black sequin material. And there's a big room full of lasers once they manage to step into a door in a massive room where lasers are everywhere. Gerald ends up getting shoved into them, and it turns out that the suits were made by Ivo, and he specifically made them to bend the lasers so that way it won't penetrate his body or do anything deadly, so to speak. So much so, the two would actually celebrate. An incredible dance scene set to galvanize. Holy crap. Talk about the best thing ever. I mean, the best thing since the Thanos snap. The best thing since Tom Hardy's Venom. That's one way to put it there. Or how about the best thing since that infamous Superman CG face? Yeah, I don't know about that one. But there's just 100 million big highlights in cinematic history, and this has got to be the best. Again, I consider the Slobbering 20s to be the best decade in all of time itself. There is no way that you can't tell me otherwise. Well, anyways, though, even when all that's over, we do head over to Team Sonic and their unique plan. Knuckles suggests to break glass in case of emergency, because what happens is that if alarms are triggered, then a big force field will come down and essentially act like a quarantine barrier. No one gets in or out. So Knuckles decides to hang back on the Big Ben, holding on to it, while Sonic and Tails manage to find their way inside. And when the Robotniks manage to find the room that the second key is located in, they try to go for it. And with Sonic following close behind, they're both unfortunately hit by a series of gravitational fields. Red goes down, green goes up. And Rockwell was onto them the whole time. She knew that they were both going to be coming after the second key. For whatever master plan they have, she was prepared for them. The only way that any of them are leaving out now is in handcuffs. And even though most of the others managed to play their parts into trying to get the second key, it just doesn't seem all too well here. Thankfully though, Sonic does have a plan B to break glass in case of emergency, and Knuckles comes in at full force, causing everybody to be disoriented and flung away from the blast zone. And wow, that's really one way to pull one over on Director Rockwell. Even better, Knuckles manages to snag the control pad that controls the gravitational chambers, and he tries to destroy it to turn off the gravity, but it unfortunately causes it to go haywire instead. Everybody is either flung down or shot upward into the air, and eventually what does happen is that, well, there's a bunch of sides that go over on who gets the key first. But unfortunately, it does seem that Tom is able to get a hold of the key. And he's even able to use his uniform to blend himself with the crowd, and more importantly, turn into the commander himself. Yeah, the same commander that died. And when Tom and Rockwell meet up in the hallway, she recognizes him as the commander. So, talk about a unique and advanced system. Shadow comes in, and he sees Tom still looking like the commander and immobilizes him. He knocks him to the ground. Sonic comes in thinking he's dead and that Shadow killed him. Well, a heated fight breaks out between the two, but unfortunately, the key ends up falling back into the hands of the Robotniks. And it turns out that with both keys in their hands, they now have the ability to turn on something big. Something that is even worse than anything that Ivo himself had worked with. Even the Death Egg robot was incredible and all, but this is of course the Shadow division of storyline and plot in the Sonic lore. And in this instance, we can't really talk about Shadow, Gerald, Maria, and etc. without talking about the Space Colony arc. And well, this massive ship is going to loom above Earth, and supposedly it has the power to decimate the planet. And Gerald, after many, many years of being hit hard by GUN, being shut down by them, and with a majority of humanity practically hating on him, of course he is going to want to annihilate the planet as a result of this. But, of course, there is still the ongoing fight between Shadow and Sonic, which even goes super as the Chaos Emeralds do come to them, and they both end up turning super as a result of this. But even though it goes from far across the planet Earth and even onto the moon, Shadow still tries to beat sense into Sonic, still being enraged after believing Shadow killed him. But, much like what had to be done with Knuckles to put some sense into him, Sonic himself had to be knocked into some sense as well, understanding the fact that Tom wasn't really killed, but merely just knocked out by Shadow. On top of all that, the real threat are the Robotniks. They want to wipe out Earth, and more importantly, Sonic's friends. And he was blinded by all this rage and stuff. Kind of like what happened when Goku first turned Super Saiyan after Frieza killed Krillin. Either way you look at it though, they have a job to do here. They both go super, and as the soundtrack kicks into the famous song Live and Learn by Crush 40, which of course was remixed by the one and only, well, yeah, the composer of the soundtrack. Either way you look at it though, Junkie XL still does a fantastic job with the soundtrack and all that. Even having Tom Holkenborg in for the scene as well, with Tom Holkenborg and Junkie XL basically making up the bulk of the soundtracks entirely, it's still amazing, so to speak. But the inclusion of all these copyrighted songs, just like with the other two films, still brings about a good sense of variety and all that. Anyways though, back in the ship, the Robotniks end up fighting each other, believe it or not. Because Ivo, he apparently realizes that with Gerald's master plan to wipe out Earth, it apparently could not only terminate Sonic, but others along the way as well. And it seems that Robotnik really doesn't want to be that kind of guy, so by going against his own grandfather, he not only starts an ongoing war between the Robotniks in the form of some hilarious dialogue exchange with each other, a few jokes here and there, and of course turning into various animals, and even a bad autocorrect moment. Well, what it all boils down to is that Ivo ends up defeated after he loses his grip and falls down to Earth through a vacuum hole in the ship. Even though Gerald tries to celebrate and all that, Ivo comes back surprisingly thanks to a ring portal opening up beneath the ship and sticks the golden quill right into Gerald's ass. Oh man. As if that's not funny enough though, Gerald himself is flung up into the generator, causing him to get zapped like a bug. Wow. He's zapped in the butt and then zapped like a bug. Talk about an unorthodox, yet fitting end for a Jim Carrey character. I mean, as funny as that is, it gets even better though, because the ship practically goes critical after firing off its massive beam, and even though Sonic and Shadow deflected at first, the likes of Knuckles, Tails, and Eggman have to steer the ship since they can't turn off the ray. So, by steering the ship away from Earth, they're able to get the beam to blast away from it. But unfortunately, the massive power surge ends up causing it to go critical. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles manage to find their way back down to Earth thanks to another ring portal being made. And at the end of it all, Eggman and Shadow are both still up in that ship until the very last moment where it explodes. But before that happens though, Eggman manages to record himself a farewell message to everyone on Earth, letting them know that what he's doing was for the good of all people. And more importantly, to reconcile with the not so good things he's done to his Agent Stone, especially when spending time with his grandfather. Yeah, there was an entire montage dedicated to all that. But in the end of it all, Stone himself tearfully weeps at this whole thing, knowing that Eggman was a good business partner, even if it meant that he was not so great with him. That seemingly is the end for Eggman himself, as well as Shadow, because when they're up in that station and it explodes, we don't see very much left. And even Team Sonic themselves are more than comforted knowing the fact that another big threat to Earth has been defeated. One that could have been more cataclysmic and life-threatening to all on Earth if it had gone through the way the Robotniks intended to do. In any case though, this is one incredible film. So much better than the other two combined. And that's not just because of the fact that the critical and financial reception this film got in 2024 alone. Just the first month or two really brought a lot of fans over. And I myself saw this as the last film of 2024. And that really is an amazing feat in my whole life that I feel like will never truly be repeated. The best number 3 film since Toy Story 3, But I get the feeling that some people out there are really going to be excited about what Part 4 will have to offer. But we still have yet to get any confirmations on what's truly there, and not to mention the teaser trailer. There were talks about Rouge the Bat and Amy Rose coming into the story for the first time, but that again has yet to be confirmed. But I'm still all in for the fact that there is going to be more Sonic films coming forward. So I'm sure I could see it twice if I wanted to, but I'll just see it once and see what happens. Anyways though, for my final scoring of Sonic 3, 9.6 out of 10.1. So even better than the other two films put together. And that is simply a fact. So in that case, that's all I got for this whole season of films I should have talked about years ago. But don't worry, because the Talk About It universe will have plenty more to offer come later. So in that sense, thank you guys very much for tuning into this somewhat long endeavor of film viewing and all that stuff. And make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more content.